Hello, once again, it's James here with WSI, where I talk to the great and good of professional wrestling, and my next guest you could find him wandering the roads along the Route 190 in the US and sometimes in Northrup, Texas as well. A military veteran, a 50-year veteran of wrestling. I don't know which one was more traumatic for him. We will ask him. Dutch Mantell, the Dirty Dutchman, how are you doing?
James, I'm doing well. Hey, you didn't screw that intro up too bad.
Yeah,
It
it
was
wasn't too
okay,
bad. It wasn't too bad.
but
I
but
missed a
I know where
US.
I know where you read that from. Walking the roads of what?
US,
119.
yeah, US 190.
You know, I've read that. I don't even know what that means. I don't think I've ever been on a. I have probably been on a road 119 at some point, but I don't know actually what reference that is making. But Oiltrough, Texas, that's where I'm from. It's a fictional town that I made up in Texas, and my it had a population of 3. It was me and my cousin Clutch and my old grandpa Sagebrush. And we all lived there, and we kept it kind of quiet because after I got out and people started knowing who I was, he told me, he said, don't tell people where it was because they'll be overrun with tourists and they weren't set up for that. So,
Did you actually pick up oil trough from another state? Because I've got it in
yeah,
my mind that
yes,
it's actually a town in another state.
it is. It's a town in Arkansas. And I just happened to pass it one night. Ron Bass and me, we were on one of those late night, never ending journeys. And we passed the town and said Oil Trough, Arkansas. And I said, wow, that's an unusual name. So I just adopted it and put Texas on it, and it worked.
You're in Nashville now, are you, or am I going crazy there?
Oh, no, I was in Nashville. I was because I was a part time country and Western superstar, just part time, just the big shows.
Hmm.
But I'm in Florida now. I'm right outside Tampa, and I've been down here maybe 2 years. And I moved down here because, and I love Nashville. I love the atmosphere there. What I didn't like was the winters. Doesn't really get that cold there, but it's wet. It's wet and 30 degrees or 33 degrees, and it's miserable weather in the winter. And the summer gets hot as hell too. So I might as well come. If I'm gonna be in the heat, at least get me in a place to where I can go to the beach.
Hmm.
Because I spent a lot of time in Hawaii and I spent a lot of time in Puerto Rico. So I just love to have access to the beach. Not that I go that much, but the thought that I can go is like makes me feel better.
The old saying of Manchester, which is where I'm from, it has everything but a beach, and also nice weather and people
Yeah,
who you'd
yeah,
also
and
want to
that's
bump into.
yeah, yeah. I remember Manchester. We were talking just right before we went to do the interview right on air, and I think I've been in Manchester 3 or 4 times. It's funny about my career. See, it didn't really get good until I passed the age of 60. Then that's when I really traveled the world. I went to Europe 4 times. I went to England probably, or the UK, maybe 5 or 6 times. Went to India. Of course, I'd been to Canada and Mexico and Japan. But it's funny that the basic part of my career didn't really happen till late. So, but things happen for a reason, I guess. I don't know.
Well, when did you stop wrestling full time? Then was it around the early '90s where you just thought, I'm gonna drop however many dates I'm doing, concentrate more on the backstage scene.
When did I start wrestling?
No, when did you stop wrestling full time?
Probably the late 80s. But I didn't stop because I wanted to stop. I stopped because, like a lot of other guys, had to stop because the business constricted upon itself. See what I mean?
Yeah.
Because where at one time you had 32 what we would call territories to work, when Vince came along and WWF came along and started eating those little territories up, and then WCW started at the other end and they were eating toward the middle. Well, that knocked out the little independent territories that produced great TV. Like Memphis at the time produced great TV. Continental, which was in like Alabama and Florida, produced great TV. Florida Championship Wrestling produced great TV, and even Mid South and Mid Atlantic and Texas. But see, they were eat up by the big guys. So, and that's why I more or less started wrestling and started trying to trying to seek a position in booking and writing and producing TV.
And rightly so as well. My first question was going to be proper, that we were going to talk about more modern wrestling, and then I was going to move on to more territorial fare. But actually, I'm going to skip the first question. If you've got time, I'll go back to it. Because I asked, and I told you this before, about 100 people replied to me with different questions and just saying, oh my God, I can't believe you've got Dutch on, how great, and etc. And everyone was very very happy. But the first one I'm going to ask is from Hagrid's disappointing son. I'd like to hear him talk about the major differences.
You know, when you sent me a list of these.
Yeah.
And what was in that guy's name? Disappointing son. What is it?
Hagrid's disappointing son. That may have been.
I was saying, what the hell is this? And I thought it's a website. It's just a guy's handle, right?
Yes.
Okay. So what was the question now?
Well, his interesting name aside, he wanted to know the differences between Bill Dundee and Jerry Jarrett and Jerry Lawler, all as bookers. What were their main things that they would go to? Who would they bring in? Who would they not bring in? What were the differences between all three?
Well, Jerry Jarrett was the owner of the company, and I think Jerry Lawler probably bought in later. But Jerry Jarrett, very, very good booker, and I learned a lot from him. Sometimes when he would shoot an angle, and he would watch it, and that's where I learned you take your time with them. I mean, you don't rush it so fast that it doesn't have time to really set in. And granted, the fans back in the day were different, but what all of them had in common is, and me too, is you had to listen to your audience. You had to watch them and see what they liked and what they didn't like. It's like a comedy club. Say a comedy club, they might pop at certain jokes. It's the clientele of people that you attract. And some things they just won't go for. And Memphis was always known for wild, outlandish TV. But the people there grew up on it, liked it, because there's a reason that Memphis was one at the time in the early 80s, was probably one of the greatest wrestling towns in the world. To go and it ran in the hot time of the season was, of course, the summers, because the kids were out of school and that was your vacation time. But to fall out in Memphis every Monday night and have an average of 8,500 to 9,000 people there. Hang on a second. I'm doing this interview, please, if you don't mind. Oh, she's getting ready to hit me. But it was amazing when you would fall out and you'd look out there and all those people there. And the best year that Memphis ever had, I think, was Jerry Jarrett was booking, and that was the year that they brought in Andy Kaufman, and I had worked to deal with Lawler early in the year, maybe January, and we made that last to like April, and I only worked with him 3 times in 3 months, but every time I worked with him was a sellout, and we did a trilogy, I call it. We did 3 matches, and then we cut it off. But because an old-time booker told me one time, he said, always cut it off before the fans cut it off, which is something I've always tried to use. But I learned all these little different things from all these different bookers. And remember one thing about bookers sometimes, successful bookers, weren't necessarily your best wrestlers or your best workers. It's like your best baseball managers were never the greatest baseball players, because great baseball managers, they spent time in the dugout watching the manager manage the game instead of playing. So that's where they learned it. So, and it is difficult, but it's not impossible. And sometimes, and I hate booking committees, because if you have an idea, it gets so diluted before you actually get to the actual doing it, producing it, having it. Because in Puerto Rico, when I booked, it was just me. I just did what I wanted to do. I didn't clear it with nobody. I just said, do it. And if it worked, it worked. If it didn't, I just threw it away. and continued what I was doing.
Yeah, there's an old saying, isn't there, that a camel is a horse designed by committee. I don't know if you ever heard that saying.
I have heard that saying.
Yeah, I don't know
What
if
exactly does that? What exactly does that mean, though?
I think it's basically if 20 people have a go putting in ideas on a horse, and then they add a hump here, and then massive lips there, and it spits there, and giant cloven hooves, and then eventually it doesn't resemble the original idea.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what a committee does. I've heard this, that you have people sitting around this table, allegedly, to contribute to a creative idea, and I have an idea. And I read this one time. You whisper to the next guy what the idea is and where it's going to go, and he in turn whispers to the next guy, and it goes all the way around the table till it gets back to the guy on the left, which is the last guy that heard. Sometimes the idea didn't even resemble what it was when it started, and sometimes had different personnel in it. So that's where it goes. And I think that's the trouble with WWE. There's too many cooks in the kitchen. I mean, and that's why some of that. And I think now wrestling promotions are afraid to do certain things because they're afraid of the mob trying to cancel them out, which could happen, I guess. I don't know. I think wrestling fans are different. I think they're smarter than that. But that's the way it works.
With I'll tell you what then, that sort of is a good, perfect segue to the first question I was going to ask you, which was about 10 years ago, you did an interview with Sean Oliver for a shoot DVD company called Kayfabe Commentaries, and you gave a 20-minute monologue about what was wrong with wrestling up to that point in 2010. And I'll read it here. It was basically no outlandish characters anymore. There's one team scripting for 200 different people, and it's all, very exactly the same pretty much. And then there's no tough looking guys either. In the sort of 10 years between 2010 and now 2021, is there anything that's really changed in wrestling? Has it got better? Has it got worse? Or has it moved to the side as far as differences?
I think it's just moved over a little bit. If you just take WWE, it's not exciting to watch it anymore. See, I do a deal now with, and I told you before we went on the air, I do like a little commentary segment on SmackDown every week. It's on the Sportskeeda network, and you can find it. You just, Facebook Sportskeeda, and we go live at 11 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is late, but it's after the SmackDown show and after the Rampage show on AEW. So we do both those. But WWE is so predictable. They don't do anything really that's out of the playbook. Even football teams have trick plays, but WWE never does have that. They have that long starting segment always for 20 years, what they call the in-ring segment to set it up, which is okay. But after a while, change it up. I thought one time, why don't they, especially now they have people back now. Why wouldn't you start a live show with a fight going on right in the ring and everybody fighting? To me, that's it. What the hell happened? We're trying to go, but this is, make it out of control from the beginning. And of course, you can't do that every week, but for 1 week, it would work, I think.
Do you think? Sorry.
And they do all kind of, they do interviews in the back sometimes. Nobody in the background. So they did it in the afternoon. But, you would think there would be people buzzing around because there's a lot of people backstage on a live show, or especially on a taping. But sometimes the long hallway would just be completely void of people, and that's not the way it works. And I think fans, it still kind of gets the point across, but it's odd looking. If you're getting more of an odd feeling than feeling the chemistry of what you're trying to present to you, it's not working at all.
Okay,
I'm good.
Right, I'm gonna try and work out how to sort of like best segue out of a. No, do you know what? I'll just do the intro again. And you already told me that first bit of the intro was absolute crap that I made up as well about US Route 190 as well.
No, so. That's fine. It's actually, I don't even know who. I've read that for years. I don't know where it came from.
I'll bring it up again. And I'm recording, yes. Hello, James here, once again with the great and good of professional wrestling, and it's WSI, of course, and my next guest with me is the back in hell. Ugh, I can never get through a bloody intro. Okay. Hello.
You know, you sound like Jeremy Borash. He would used to do that. God damn it, Butch! I'll get it right in a minute. Shit.
Do you know what? I think that's probably going to be like the best intro I can possibly do. So I am the Jeremy Borash of YouTube wrestling interviews. I'll take that any day. How you doing, Dutch? We had some noise issues from of a domestic nature downstairs.
Yeah, we did, but I squashed it, and it's all done. Now, if somebody runs in here with a club and hits me, you know why. But it'll surprise viewers, but it won't surprise you, and the damn sure won't surprise me.
So when we started doing the recording of, I think we got 9 minutes into it before the microwave started going. I was asking you about WWE. I was asking you about Memphis and such, but I don't want to ask you anything that I've asked you already. So I'm probably going to move straight on. And this was the question that we sort of got interrupted when I was sort of halfway through. But I was asking you about when you were in Memphis, when they were in the early 80s doing as well as they could possibly be, Andy Kaufman, and everything else. There was the upstart, yappy little dog in the corner, the IWA, the POFO territory. How did you guys in the Memphis territory react to the POFOs? Did you ignore them? Did their taunts bother you? And what did you think they were hoping to achieve?
Well, everybody knew what they were hoping to achieve. They were trying to get notice upon themselves, which I don't blame them for that. And they were challenging Lawler, and they were challenging Dundee and me and the Fabs and whoever else was in Memphis at the time. So, and they were doing that just to have their fans think there may be some kind of interaction between Jared's company and their company. How did we handle it? We basically ignored it basically because they didn't make me a dime. The talk made me nothing, so I was just concentrated on what I was doing, and we just rode up and down the road, and we just coexisted for a long time.
I looking at old YouTube clips, because obviously I wasn't in the area, I wasn't even born when both territories were going. It always seemed to me that Memphis, apart from having the better wrestlers, you know, with all due respect to Randy and Lanny and a few others who were there, they always had the better production, they always had the better wrestlers, whereas IWA, the POFO territory, looked like it was filmed on a potato, even by 70s standards. So it's like they could have never been a real threat, surely.
Well, if they had upped their production values. See, a lot of TV stations, they won't take a production that looks crappy. Only very few stations would take that. And, I mean, I think TV stations are more interested in wrestling today than they were then. So, but I think Randy, if he'd, and he was a pretty smart guy. You know, Randy is very creative because I worked with him in another territory here in Tennessee outside of Memphis for a whole year. And we do nothing but, I mean, good crowds. When we came in, the territory was almost basically dead. They would go to a show in Nashville, and they draw 150 people. And then me and Randy started working something between us, and then the building would only hold 1,000, maybe. And when we started selling it out. So that shows you the difference between having not necessarily a great production, but a good creative flow. Because Randy had that ability. If people were, say, channel surfing, and you run by Randy, and you're not even a wrestling fan now, and all of a sudden, no, the news is coming on. Oh yeah, watch Shock Theater and so on. And then you go to the next channel, and there's Randy. Oh yeah, freak out, dude. And then you go back and you went, what the hell was that? Then you go back and you watch Randy. Randy was very almost much watch TV because he was so different. And you mentioned when I did like a 20-minute monologue on what the wrestling territories were about 10 years ago. I did this interview. What did I say then?
You said in 2010, wrestling in those days in 2010, everybody was cookie cutter, non-tough
Yes.
guy looking, one team of script writers writing for everybody rather than everybody being themselves, and no outlandish characters.
Yes. Because in today's world, we're caught up in that cancel culture. And don't offend anybody at all. You can't offend anybody. But in years past, when you had two Japanese wrestlers going to the ring, automatically they was waving the flags and wearing the clogs or whatever. And they were automatically the bad guys. Or if you had two Germans, two Nazis going there and doing the goose step, of course, they were the bad guys. But now you can't do that. You got to have two guys coming down there and they look good. And then you have two other guys come down there. But what distinguishes these two guys, these two teams? What, their color of their trunks or the color of their outfits? I mean, a wrestler has to do something to kind of make the people dislike him. I think the best heel in the business right now is that kid in AEW, that MJF, whatever his name is. Great heel, because he's a heel 24/7. He's not a heel just on TV. And then he goes out and does an interview and he said, "Oh, yeah, well, my name is whatever, and I live here and I did this." He's got to be a heel 24/7. And that's why he shoots the bird to everybody, even little kids. I mean, he's a heel. So, and that's what kind of makes you stand out amongst the guys today. Because to me, they all look like a junior college football team. They all like the 5'10", 6'3", whatever, 220 pounds, buffed, jacked up. And they all talk. They don't talk any different than anything else. And there's no outlandish gimmicks anymore, which I thought was the beauty of wrestling, because it's almost like Halloween, Christmas, 4th of July, kind of all thrown together on one show. But they don't have that anymore, because I don't think they have the creativity to put that together. And even if they did, I think they're afraid to put it on TV. Afraid. Now, this is 2021. This will probably play in 2022. But I don't think things would change that much. But they are afraid of getting rejected. They are afraid of getting canceled, but not by the people, by the advertisers. Because the people that are the woke generation, they got it down to a science, I think. If they do like a email push on, say, Procter and Gamble, we'll never buy another product, and what you advertise on this show is just horrendous. So here's this guy. He picks it up, horrendous, and we're never going to buy another Procter & Gamble product. Oh, my God, I got to show this to the boss. And then it hits the stages, boom, boom, to the top. And all of a sudden that the sponsorship is dropped of wrestling. That's what they're afraid of. See, if you're afraid of that, then, and that's why wrestling, I think, is suffering today. It's why it doesn't really stand out amongst anybody else. Any other promotions, but that's my thought. So it may be true, it may not be true.
Well, that actually started, I remember, in 1999, and L something, I can never remember the guy's name, but there was like a huge blowback, specifically against SmackDown, because it was on network television. Yep. And, the risque stuff they were doing. So that was sort of the first time I think WWE really experienced cancel culture. I know the Goldust character a few years earlier, some advertisers pulled out over that, and then the best of Goldust ended up getting lost, and then you just ended up getting a tamer version maybe 18 months later to appease the advertisers.
Well, Goldust was great at that character. Dustin was almost tailor-made for that gimmick, because he did so well with it. And it's a shame they kind of slowed it down, because to me, very entertaining. And I don't think he didn't offend me. He may have offended some gay people or some androgynous people, I guess, or the transgenders. But hey, that's life, I think. You know, you're going to have transgenders and you're going to have bums on the street and you're going to have prostitutes and you're going to have killers and you're going to have bullies and you're going to have this. But if you can't mix them all together to where they interact, I don't know what you got. I think you have a very boring society.
I'm actually going to give you another quote that you gave in the same interview, or words to the effect of, you were talking about, as well as wrestling not being the same as it used to be, and it's the Vince Russo theory of shades of grey. And you said, yep. I want a good guy, I want a bad guy.
Yes.
Slap me in the face with it. Yep. I can't imagine you've changed your mind on that.
No, I haven't, because to me, you don't watch American football, do you?
I've watched quite a few games. I'm familiar with it. I still don't understand it.
Okay, but you're used to, say, football in the UK, correct?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, who's your favorite team?
Well, I suppose Manchester United, because I'm here, but let's say Manchester United.
Okay, and what team do you just hate?
I suppose Liverpool.
Who's your biggest?
Let's say Liverpool.
Okay. But if both of them went out there and you didn't really give a crap about either one of them, and they played a game, and one wins, there's no joy and there's no disappointment. It's just blah. You know what I mean? So if you take the 50-50, and you've heard this, the 50-50 booking formula, if it's 50-50, no matter who loses, you're going to piss half your crowd off. So why not make one guy just a full-fledged, no-good son of a bitch? So when he gets his clock clean, the people get a relief. They get a rush. That third guy won. I hate that 50-50 booking. I don't give a shit if they're the greatest wrestlers in the world. If you want the greatest wrestlers in the world, go watch MMA, I guess. Go watch amateur wrestling. But don't take it to pro wrestling. Give me a show. Give me something I'm going to remember. But within limits, of course. I don't want cussing and any kind of sexual moves in it. But you can do that without having that. But I don't like the 50-50 that formula at booking, because to me, I think it's counterproductive to itself.
And oh damn it, I've forgotten what I was going to ask then. Sorry, give me 1 second. Ah shit. I've done the Jeremy Boras thing there. I've forgotten exactly. I had the perfect question in my mind and I've completely forgotten it. Yeah, I'll tell you what.
Well, maybe if you hadn't drank that whole refrigerator full of wine.
I've only got this through. I've only got that through, ladies and gentlemen.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, I mean, I am a lightweight, but
yeah, we'll get there. We'll get there.
Who do you think originated the 50-50 booking philosophy then?
Well, if Russo liked it, I'd say he did it. There's nothing wrong with it on a limited scale. Say a 50-50 booking, the one I remember, and a lot of people around Memphis remember this, is Lawler and me in 1982. That was right before Andy Kaufman came in, and right before Lawler made the Letterman show and all this. But I was a good guy, and Lawler was a good guy. But he got hurt. He hurt his leg or something. And he couldn't work for a couple of weeks. In the meantime, I won the Universal title. I guess that's the name of it. I forgot now. So I'm doing that interview, and Jerry told me, and he was the booker. He said, go out there and say there's a lot of people that are interested in challenging you for this title, and mention Terry Funk and Dory Funk and Bockwinkel and this guy and that guy and Austin Idol. But at the end, I want you to throw Jerry Lawler's name in there. So I went out, and it's a live studio audience. And so I went out and I said, I've had a lot of, requests that I put the title up against. And I named them Funks and Austin Idol and all of them. And I said, I'll tell you a strange one I got was Jerry Lawler. Right then you could hear the audience go, because now that's the first time it had dawned on them that, hey, I might go against Lawler, or Lawler might challenge me. So, and we did this without an angle, without anything. We just talked our way to it. And I did an interview, and Lawler did an interview. And I told Lawler, I said, hey, if I get a chance to knock your lights out, I'm going to do it, so be prepared. because I knew I was going to punch him. He was going to punch me, but I was going to punch him first. So we went to the ring that first night in Memphis, and I don't think this has ever happened in Memphis history, especially with Lawler, that we split the crowd when they announced my name, or say Lawler's name. He had a sizable number of people that were supporting him. And when they announced me, I think it surprised both me and Lawler, because my pop was not as big as his, but it was close. And I think that surprised us. So we went in and we had the match, and he actually beat me. And then we took our time about getting to the second, because I remember how we topped it off was he beat me, and then Jimmy Hart and his army came in and they were beating the crap against Lawler. Because I'm now selling something, I forgot what it was, and I got up. Now the people were saying, even Lawler fans were saying, F you, Dutch, F you, when I went in. But now they're saying, help him, Dutch, help him. That's how quick they can change. But I got up and looked like I was going to help Lawler, and then walked out and left him to Jimmy Hart and his crew. So when he was bitching about it Saturday on the live TV, I just went out and logically said, hey, why should I help you? You made those enemies. I didn't. I stay out of things I'm not involved in. And then Lawler, he said, I want a match with you. And I said, hey, when I'm ready to give you a match, I'll tell you. See, that goes against the grain too, because why should a champion be going after a challenger? It's usually reversed. It's usually the challenger saying, I want a match with the champion. And then I think in 2 more weeks, we booked it. We sold out again. This time I beat him right in the middle, which has never happened before. And then we topped it off about 2 weeks later after that. We only worked 3 times in about 3 months. We topped it off with a barbed wire match, and we sold out again. And then we let it go. We never revisited it ever.
It's funny you mentioned. Do you think you never revisited it because you were getting too many cheers, and Lawler thought, maybe I shouldn't be working with Dutch too many times, or else I could lose my fan support?
Well, I thought that at the time, but I think you can revisit it too much. And remember, I've told you before, I told you a little earlier, I don't think your viewers heard it, that you need to turn things loose or let it go before the people let it go. So I think we turned it loose at the right time, and we could have probably went back later on, because this is the thing about wrestling. Fans do not forget, ever. See, a case in point, let me tell you, when I was in WWE and I was managing Swagger, then I left for a while because I broke my leg, really is what I did. But when I come back, when I was ready to come back 6 or 7 months later, they put me with Alberto Del Rio. And I was thinking, why would I, of course I didn't say this, because it was Vince's idea. He said, yeah, we need to put that Zeb Del Rio. It'll be great. But nobody understood it. Even his agents and his creative team, they didn't understand it. I didn't understand it. So I was trying to tell them, I said, you can put me with him, but the people are not going to buy this unless we work toward a setup. And they said, well, what do you mean a setup? And I was thinking, well, it is such a contrast in my character that I would trust Alberto Del Rio, who's a part of a group that I really downrated for the better part of 2 years, immigrants, because I was calling him an immigrant and he was illegal. But I said, if we had worked toward some kind of an angle that put me back with Jack and we set up Del Rio, I said, then it'll work. But they didn't listen to me, and eventually they just cut off the angle and told me to go home till they had something, which I knew they weren't going to come up with anything. And about 3 months later, I got my release.
Was Vince, excuse me, my voice went very high then. Was Vince always so reactionary as far as, we just should do this next week and people won't remember?
Oh, I don't know. But that's just the way he is. So you either learn to live with it See, an old timer told me one time, if you don't like it here, you got two options. First is buy the company and do it the way you want it, or quit. So that's your options. I said, oh, okay. Since you explained it like that, I guess I'll go and do what you want me to do.
We'll skip ahead then, and I was going to ask you about Alberto Del Rio. I know you did a lot of stuff. You managed Jack Swagger, you managed Cesaro for a brief period as well, and with Alberto, with things that we know about him now, he got fired. He had a bit of a temper. Then he started going out with Paige, and then a lot of court cases that I won't need to get into. Was there any inkling that he was really difficult to deal with personally when you were managing him or hanging out with him?
Personally, no. And I didn't hang out with him because he was a younger guy. I was an older guy. So we didn't go to bars. I didn't go to bars anyway. But he did have a temper, because I remember one day, and I wasn't in catering, but there was around a table, there was a writer or some kind of production assistant, and he got up to leave, and he left a bunch of stuff on the table. And somebody says, hey, you going to take this with you? He said, no, they'll clean it up. He said, no, they don't have anybody to clean it up. He said, Alberto will get it. And he's just kidding. Well, it made Alberto very mad, and he stand up, and he said, why did you say that? And he took offense to it. So he ends up just open hand slapping this guy. And I don't know if he knocked him down, but he stunned him, and the guy, he left. But you can't have that. You can't have the wrestlers slapping production. I think both of them got released. But Vince always had a soft spot for Del Rio for some reason. He liked the guy. And he ended up bringing him back. When I came back, he ended up bringing him back. And then, of course, we didn't last very long together. See, somebody says, I read that I was brought back because of my Army experience. I really wasn't. I was brought back because, you remember the Tea Party movement in the U.S.?
Yeah, I remember, yeah.
That's why I was brought back, because, you know, they were going to change, and they was actually getting some traction underneath their views. So I was supposed to represent the Tea Party, kinda, but I think some of the writers had it in that we would make fun of it till I took it seriously. And they said, oh, they're going to hate. This is what the writers told me when I first came back, doing the Zeb Colter gimmick. He said, oh, the people are just going to hate you. And I was thinking, you know, I don't know. Because you can't you can't say, I don't know. Because you got to agree with them. But I didn't think Zeb Colter would be universally hated. And he wasn't. And the first night I stepped in the ring as Zeb Colter, and we did it in Nashville, Tennessee, which I had spent a lot of time. So I was kind of known fairly decently in the wrestling world around there. And I did about a 3-minute interview in the middle of the ring. And about halfway through it, it popped. They finally got what I was doing. And then when I got to We the People, all you do is tell them once or twice, then they got it. We the people. I want everybody, real American, to please stand and rise and put your hand on your heart and say, along with me, we the people. One time I was you're from Manchester?
I am.
Manchester.
Mm-hmm.
I did it in Manchester, but this is the way I did it. I said, I want every Englishman in this building to please rise. Because actually my spiel that night was, what are you people doing? What do you this is when they were still in the, what did they just withdraw from three years ago? What was it called? Brexit is Britain.
Brexit,
exit,
Brexit,
right?
yeah.
So what was the exit? What was the exit company? The organization called?
The European Union. I'm sorry.
Okay, I said, why do you guys want to be in that? Do you want a bunch of Germans telling you what to do? Oh my God, I got a hell of a response. What? You want a bunch of Frenchmen telling you what to do? You want to be speaking French? And then I forgot. I said, but I actually hit a nerve. So I said, you need to get out and stay out. Lead your own way. And then that's when I said, I want every Englishman, real Englishman in this building to please rise, put your hand over your heart and say along with me, God save the Queen. And they got it, and they popped huge. But that's how you get to them, because that's what you're taught from, I guess, in England. God save the Queen is like you learn it from your little kid, right?
Yeah.
So they knew it. So, and I actually touched them on that.
And also, it's a Sex Pistols song, so I probably more know it from that anyway.
Oh, really?
Hey,
that's the Sex Pistols. Was that Sid Vicious and
Johnny Rotten? Yeah,
Johnny Rotten. That's how Sid Vicious got his name. I gave him the name.
Oh, did you really?
Sid Udi is his real name. Is Sid Udi, and we're looking for a name. We were in another company at the time. We was in the Continental, which is like Southern Alabama.
Yeah, the Alabama.
Yeah. And I said, why don't we call him Sid Vicious? Because his real name is Sid Vicious. And they said, we're going to call you Sid Vicious. Oh, he loved it. And he made the name work for him.
Did Lord Humongous not do it for you then, as a name?
Well, it's a copy. And he was Lord Humongous for a while, and they had another guy. And there was all kind of knockoffs all over the place. But no, he never did it for me because, I mean, what is the heat when a guy can just go in the ring and just beat the crap out of you? I mean, there's no heat. I mean, he just beats you up. He didn't cheat. He didn't do anything that the people that was illegal. He just actually beat you up. So actually the heat was on the guy he was wrestling for being dumb enough to get in the ring with him to get the crap beat out of him. That's the way I always looked at it. But a heel is a different type of individual, because great heels are always victims of something. Every time something happens to him, people are against him. People don't want to see him succeed. They're jealous of him, this, that, and the other. Nothing is ever his fault. And you've known people like this in real life. And they have heat. They're actually real heels, but don't know it. But that's what a real good heel, if he knows psychology and he knows how to actually work people, he's got it made. And a heel doesn't have to go out there and shout and scream and holler. He can actually go out there and cry, and he'd get his feelings hurt because the people didn't like him. That's the biggest heat getter ever. So, and guys who have figured that out had a lot of success in the heelness of wrestling.
Since you brought up Sid, I'll always ask this question because I've asked this a couple of times. But even when you were working with him with, I don't know if it was USWA or Memphis, I should have checked. No, sorry, in Alabama as well. Was he skipping dates, shots to play softball back then as well?
No, I don't think so. He probably skipped dates in Memphis, but I don't really remember that, to tell you the truth. I think if he was going to play softball, and I'm not saying he didn't skip dates, according to where the date was, he wouldn't skip a Memphis and he wouldn't skip a major town. He may have skipped some of the smaller spot show towns by saying he was sick, but he's really playing softball. But that's a thing that's kind of stuck with him. But I don't think he, to my knowledge, he never did it.
What was Sid like personally then? Because I've heard the gamut of great guy to, of all people, Mike Chioda, the referee, the WWE referee, said he was a bit of a bully. So, like, as personally, what was he like? Was he just high-strung like he was on TV, or how did you find him?
Well, you had to watch I like Sid. I got along with him well. But Sid, if somebody was going to try to upstage him, that would make him mad. And sometimes he would say something, and he was, I guess the word is touchy. You ever heard that word, touchy?
Oh, yeah,
I guess.
Of course, yeah.
Because, and I've seen him like that. But by and large, he was okay.
Yeah. Would you have, let's say you're booking Sid's career, would you have ever made him the bad guy? Or would he have always been your, statuesque, muscly, tall, good guy and champion that everybody would challenge?
Great heel. Because he looks like a heel. His face looks like a heel. Face Sid's got a face that only a mother could love. Because he looks like he could kick your ass. And if you take him in and you give him just a few thoughts that he can get beat, you put a lot of heat on that guy. Because he's 6'8" or 6'9", and he's not overly muscled, and he's tall, but he looks great. He's always looked great. So, but you see, making a guy a heel or a babyface only depends on who their opponents are going to be. Now, like, this is the way the territories used to operate. Let me push my deal up here. So, like, territories used to operate on the resident babyface theory. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like Lawler had, Memphis had Lawler.
The incumbent.
Right. Florida always had Dusty. New York, the old WWF always had Bruno. The Fuller's companies always had Ron Fuller. But it was the resident babyface, like Georgia would have Mr. Wrestling, so to speak. So all you had to do, see, the actual formula wasn't hard to understand. You ran the heels through. And say a heel started in Memphis, they would start a lot of new heels. Your top heels, they'd start them like in January. And they could run all the way through the end of summer, 9 months. But then, unless you want to play rehash and go back through it with this guy, you bring new heels in. Then Lawler would have a new opponent. And when Lawler was like the knight on the shining white horse, invading, the heel would be like the big fire-breathing dragon who invaded the kingdom. And of course, he was going to the king, and the king would be the only one who could slay this dragon. So after he beat me, and he beat Dundee, and he beat somebody else, and some more baby faces, finally now the king's going to stop him. And they have this big battle over a period of 6 weeks or whatever it is. And then the king would always vanquish the dragon, and things were back like they were supposed to be till the next fire-breathing dragon came in. That's what Jimmy Hart's job was. He would bring the fire-breathing heels in, and he would manage all of them to get to Lawler. A great formula, and it worked for 5 years, like a charm. And Bruno the same way, and Dusty the same way, Von Erickson, Texas the same way. So it was a formula that if you followed the formula, you were going to be successful. That's why I'm saying they all came in with different gimmicks too. Like the Ugandan Giant. They didn't find him in Africa. They found him down in Mississippi someplace. James Harris, which was a great guy. So this was a Jerry Jarrett invention. We said, hey, he's a big guy, and he actually come to the dressing room when I met Memphis, and I knew him. I said, hey, James, what are you doing? Oh, yeah, man. So what are you going to do? He said, I'm going to try to see if I can do something with you guys. I thought it'd be great, because I liked him. So, and they said, well, let us think about it. They talked to him that Monday night, and they came back to Nashville where they live. And they got to thinking about this. See, they couldn't bring him in just as a regular, or they could, but you want to bring somebody in that's going to get the most attention and possibly draw the most money. So they come up with the Ugandan Giant, of course, from Uganda. And so they came up with some name. He was found by this doctor, and he brought him in and did nothing but money with him. And then, of course, he went to the Mid-South after that. And then he ended up with in WWF with Vince. Because Vince loved those gimmicks like that, because they were easy to work with. I mean, because when he comes out of the dressing room, what do you think about this guy? If you've never seen him before, he's wrestling just a regular looking, guy that looks good. Well, who are you going to cheer for? Are you going to cheer for this monster, this big giant? Or are you going to cheer for the underdog? Well, of course you're going to cheer for the underdog, because that's human nature. And then the giant would go in there and just beat the crap out of him.
I'm going to give you a fact, actually, and then I'm going to move on to the next thing. But Hulk Hogan versus Kamala was the main event of the very first time the WWF was ever shown in this country
Mm-hmm.
ever in 1986. And
Mm-hmm.
you know, who else better to sort of get over what the WWF was all about in outlandish and huge characters as well. I'm actually going to move on, Dutch, and I'm going to give you the first of the games. If we've got any more time, I'll do some more. And this is the name association. So I'm going to give you a sentence, and you tell me, almost like, you know, rapid fire, you tell me who best fits the mold of the description I give you. And
well, you gotta give me a little time. Not the first thing I think of, because I've been hit on the head a couple of 100,000 times, and sometimes that slows the brain's mechanism down a little bit. So just give me just bear with me.
Okay,
so we'll go through this.
We'll go tepid fire then. And the first thing I will ask you is the funniest person in the locker room, any locker room.
I would say me.
You can't say yourself. I should have clarified that.
Okay, Brad Armstrong. And you never heard that about him, right?
I have.
He was he was hilarious. But Brad's his sore spot was getting in front of a camera, and he's like a deer in the headlights, and none of the character or personality he would display in the dressing room ever made it to video. But he was hilarious and he was funny. He could have been a comedian if he could have taken his same act that he did in the dressing room on stage. But he was one of the funniest guys. Cornette is funny when he's not trying to kill somebody, you know, or threatening to kill you.
Yeah, or terroristic threats. I believe that one came out. You remember that one? The last man standing at the bar.
The last man standing. So the biggest drinker.
Yeah.
Let me see. I don't know, because I don't drink. Well, I drink, but I never spend a lot of time in bars. But I would say one of the last guys I saw standing there drinking was Haku.
You're not the first person to say Haku either, amazingly.
Haku, this is a story about Haku. I'm going to tell you. You know, I spent a lot of time in Nashville. And one of the bars, I think it's on Murfreesboro Road, that's one of the main roads that leads through Nashville. They had a bar that stayed open to about 3 o'clock. And he was in there one night, everybody drunk. And, you know, Haku is kind of a person of color. Of course, one of those Nashville jackoffs said, you know, get the whatever out of here. And he heard that. He's about half hammered too. He ended up beating up by himself about 5 or 6 guys. And they had to call the police out, and he ended up beating 2 or 3 of them. And they maced him and handcuffed him and took him in. And what happened, he didn't really hurt any of the cops, but he kind of messed up some of those guys. And the promoter was an old guy named Nick Goulas. He ended up getting him out of jail and kind of soft soaping everything that happened, trying to push it out. And he got out of it. I don't know how, but Haku was not only a drinker, but he was a tough guy and he could back it up, but never staggered. And another guy, last guy at the bar, would be Andre.
Of course.
Andre was too much.
I'm actually going to bring up Andre in a little bit. The next question I had was, who was the legit toughest wrestler? And I think it may be the same answer.
Well, Haku's got to fit in there, but he was just the toughest guy. I think he would probably be one of the toughest. Our Dr. Death, Steve Williams, but the only thing about Steve Williams, he couldn't take a punch. He was great grappling and wrestling, but Haku, you just couldn't stop the guy. He was just, but the nicest guy you'd ever want to meet. I mean, if you met Haku and he wasn't drinking, oh, you fall in love with him. He'd treat you so nice. Oh, hello, how you doing? Blah, 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 and shake your hand, and just as pleasant as he could be, till he started drinking and somebody pissed him off.
I heard one version of the story of that where Haku, to use wrestling, the parlance of our times, to quote the Big Lebowski, he no-sold the mace, and it didn't faze him, and he carried on attacking the police.
Well, I would say that's true in that story I just told, because, you know, they had to mace him. You know, he's about 6'3", and he's about 270, and he was in shape, so
A tough
they
man to
couldn't handle
stop.
him.
I'm going to give.
Yes,
I'm going
he
to give
was.
you. I'm going to give you this one then. The biggest wind-up merchant. Who was the person who could wind up people the most?
To sell stuff to.
No, just to irritate a fellow co-worker.
Oh my God. Probably, I would say Owen Hart. Owen Hart was, but he would wind them up over a period of time. I mean, he wouldn't go in the dressing room and just say, hey, watch me get Dutch over here. I'll have him. He would start it that night, and then the next night he would come in and he never did it to me, but I'm just using myself as an example. He'd do something else to me. And now he's got me sucked in. And then he would do a show every night. He'd just let his own guys know what he was doing. They'd watch him. So he would actually work an angle within an angle, and the people enjoyed it every night. So I remember one time I was working for WWE, I think, and we had this match in somewhere in Alabama. And Owen he was on the other side. I was working against him. But he wanted to do a dive off the top rope on me, on the floor, and wanted me to catch him. You know how difficult that is. See, I'd never done it before. But if somebody just jumps, even come running and jumps in your arms, if they're your same weight, well, there's no guarantee you can hold them. And I knew when he come off that rope, I'd be like this. He's on concrete. I knew I was going to go down. I'd probably crack my head or break my arm or something. And I told him, well, this is what I told him. I said, yeah. He said, do you want to do that, Dutch? I said, yeah, we can do it. But let me highly advise you that when you come off that turnbuckle, hook a parachute on your ass, because I ain't going to be there. He said, oh, no, we won't do it if you don't want to. I said, well, good. I'm glad you understood that. You remember the Randy Colley, the Moondog?
I do, yeah.
He said, I'll do it. I'll do it, Owen. So they went out there, and Randy did it. And guess what happened? Knocked him out and broke his arm. And he was out for about 6 weeks. Then I looked at Owen and I said, now you see why I didn't want to do it. I don't know why guys don't see that stuff. See, I saw a guy the other day, he was doing this, some kind of flip, and he turns. This guy was supposed to catch him. Well, the guy completely missed him. The guy tore his face up on the floor. Both of them got knocked out. I don't know why people do that. And it was on a little independent show, 50, 60 people there. Now, why would somebody do that? I don't go. I think a lot of the wrestlers' IQs aren't very high sometimes, because, you know, it didn't take a mathematician to figure out that body mass falling and weight falling, you got to have a much bigger body mass to catch that. Mm-hmm. I mean, I don't know anything about calculus or anything, but that's not hard to figure out. But somehow it fell through the cracks for some people.
Yep. And because you mentioned Owen Hart, I've written a book on Owen Hart, so please go out and buy it.
Really?
I have, yes. And honestly, that's
Owen Hart, here's another story.
Please.
Owen Hart was the cheapest son of a bitch in the world. You've heard that, right?
Yes, I've written about it as well.
Okay, and you may have wrote the story. He goes on the road, and he had like little followers. A lot of them were females, and I guess his wife knew about it. I don't know. But they would pick him up at the airport, take him to a hotel and pay for his room, and take him to the matches, bring him back, feed him, do whatever he wanted to do as long as he was in that town. And then he would take him back to the plane. And I think he may have left some towns with more money than he came in with.
He probably did.
And he was notorious for that. You know, Jeff Jarrett, he tells some stories of him, and it's hilarious to hear it.
It ain't what you make, it's what you save. That's the old saying.
Where that come from is old Nick Goodless. He was an old-time promoter, and he was known for stiffing you on payoffs. So I heard the story one time. Some Mexican, he used to use a lot of Mexicans. So they're just cheaper, or they were then. And the Mexican, he didn't make any money the last week or whatever. And he said, Miss Unique, I only make $70 that week. And they went, hot damn, boy, it ain't what you make, it's what you save. And the Mexican went, what? He just walked off. So, but he was a super cheap.
Is it any wonder everybody migrated to Jerry Jarrett? I mean, is it any wonder within 2 weeks Nick Goldust was just dead? I'm gonna move on, and I'm gonna ask you the smelliest wrestler you ever wrestled.
The smelliest. Let me see. Well, most of the guys I worked weren't too bad. There was a few of them. But what was that called? The guy, he was in the WWE and Booger, Bastian Booger.
Yes, Mike. Is it Mike Shaw? I think that might be his name.
Something like that. But I walked by him one time and I went, "My God!" So,
a fine answer. I'll move on then. The most dangerous situation you ever found yourself in with fans?
Oh my God, to Puerto Rico. Because it was a riot, not a riot, but a scuffle every night. Because I went to Puerto Rico in 1979, and I'm so stupid that I thought the territory had been there like 20 years. Well, they'd only started up 3 years earlier, so they were still growing. People were still trying to smarten themselves up to wrestling. I mean, they've had wrestling before, but it would be like one night stands, and Florida would come in and then they'd leave. This was the first time they actually established the territory in Puerto Rico. And I was the first American who went down there and trash talked the island. I'd say things like, Spanish is a primitive language. I speak it fluently, but I don't because I consider it trash. And I learned trash was called basura. Oh, yeah, I could see the people when I was saying some of these words, and they were looking at me like, I cannot believe. Words have meaning. And if they've never heard this before, and I told them that the guys are like semi-homosexuals, but and the women are like unpaid prostitutes. I mean, I got strong with it. I didn't realize, I didn't think it was as strong when I was doing it, but after now I think about it, I went, well, hell, I would have hated myself too. So I got so hot down there, it got to a point to where I couldn't even walk down the street. Now I could walk down the street because I had a short beard then, and I looked like a tourist. But I put that hat on and walked down the street. I couldn't go three or four steps because people screaming at me, shouting at me, And that's when I learned actually my working knowledge of Spanish, because you learn the bad words first. They say, "Hijo de puta." And if you're in Puerto Rico, you hear the word and you say, well, it can't be good because it's the way they say it. Hijo de puta, which is
son of a
bitch,
mm-hmm.
Or bastardo, bastard, or, and it was just. So, see, I thought they were just yelling at me because I was such a great technician in the ring till I found out, no, they're yelling at you because they actually really do hate you and wish you harm. So one night we was in the big building. It was called Roberto Clemente, who was a famous baseball player. And we had a barbed wire match between Carlos Colon, who was like a god there, and somebody else. I forgot. I think it was Hurricane Castillo Sr. And they have a wrestling commission there, which is useless, of course, like all commissions are. But they wouldn't let us put up the barbed wire. So we said, we'll just start fighting from the beginning. But the place was, seats 17,000. 17,000 people there, and they had to close the doors and turn people away that night. So on the way to the ring, we had to fight our way to the ring. How many times have you heard that? You've heard of fighting your way back, right?
Yes.
So we actually, because they're all drunk. And I'll tell you another story in a minute. They were all drunk. So, and I found out that's why they usually put their main event on 4th, to keep the people from getting too drunk and they can end it on a happy note. That night we couldn't because it was a barbed wire match. We fought our way through the people, and I got in the ring. I'm blowed up by now because I'm punching people back and forth. The cops, they're actually scared. And then I looked at that people, and they had filled in that little aisle we come down. And I told my partner, Frankie Lane, I said, Frankie, you see that where we just come in? Yeah. I said, in about 15 minutes, we're going to have to be going right back through that bunch of son of a bitches. And I doubt if they're going to leave. And of course, they didn't leave. We fought our way back. And the matches were over at about 12 o'clock. Puerto Rico always runs longer than you think it should run. So I didn't leave the building till like 2:30. I couldn't get in my car till like 2:30 in the morning. They waited for me outside. But they were very, very dangerous. They would throw rocks. They would throw bottles. They would throw spark plugs. They'd throw everything. So
it's funny you mentioned. It's funny that you mentioned Frankie Lane, because the last podcast I did with Don Morocco, he mentioned the story about Mighty Zulu. Was it Ronnie Pope who ended?
Yep.
Yeah.
I remember the story. He hit him in the head.
Yeah.
Almost killed him.
Yeah, I had absolutely no idea about that story. I mean, I don't suppose you ever met Ronnie Pope, did you, at any point?
Ronnie Pope, that's Zulu, right?
Yeah, I think, Mighty Zulu,
He's a moron. He's just a big muscle guy, but he wasn't really he was just kind of smooth looking, and he was just on steroids, but he was a goof. I don't know what Frankie had said to him, but I think he said something. It was, I think, racially charged or something, but he slipped up behind him with an iron pipe, and he didn't see him coming, and he hit him in the back of the head. And he almost killed him. He almost did. And by the time I had met Frankie, you could tell he showed effects of that attack, because he would stutter and he would do this a lot and blink his eyes. So he was never right after the attack by Zulu.
Yeah, I know. I'd never heard that story until the last time I spoke to Don, and that was a pretty shocking one. I'll tell you what, this sort of like leads into the next question then, is the most memorable backstage fight that you saw.
Well, I've seen a few. I've been in a few myself. Probably the most memorable was Steve Kern and Coco Ware.
Everyone says that one as well.
Yeah, because what happened in Memphis was the Fabulous Ones, they played music, and all of a sudden, and they would dance to the ring a little bit, and then Coco came in and he was doing the same thing, and they wanted to call it out on him like it was his idea. It wasn't his idea, it was Jerry Jarrett's idea. And they came to Nashville one night, and they weren't booked there. They were booked somewhere else at what we call a spot show, but they didn't go there. They came to Nashville with the express intent of confronting Coco. And they came in there, and I saw them come in. I said, "Why are you guys here? You're not booked." Well, and they didn't. I asked Stan. Stan didn't say anything. So I'm sitting in the dressing room, and I saw Steve and Coco over there in the corner. The dressing room's not too big. It's about a 20 by 20 room, maybe 18, not that big. Had a shower in it and everything. But they're sitting over next to the shower, and they're talking, and all of a sudden, it just broke out. They just started fighting. And I said, "Hey, guys, stop," because business was really, really good. I didn't want any one of them to get hurt because they were both like main players. And finally, somebody told me, "Step back, Dutch." I said, "Hey, I'm done with it." I stepped back because it was none of my business. But I don't like to see that because, one of them gets hurt and you got to change your plans. It could affect all of us. But Steve had the upper hand for a minute, and then Coco just started unloading those haymakers on him. And he never really knocked Steve down and didn't knock him out or anything. But finally, Steve said, "Screw it." He quit and he left.
You remember, it's funny because Ricky Morton told me that story, I think, as well. And
Ricky Morton was the one who told me to get back.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Well, I suppose it created a story for both of you to share on my YouTube podcast 30 years later, at least. But are there any others that sort of stick out in your mind?
the fights. Junkyard Dog. No, wasn't it? It wasn't Junkyard Dog. Butch Reed. And remember the Berserker?
Yeah, John Nord, yeah.
They got in a fight in Mid-South. I don't know what it was about. But they were like nitpicking back and forth. And, Bill Watts was afraid to put them in the ring together. So he just called them together. Bill Watts said, hey, if you're going to fight down here so we don't kill our own business in the ring. And they started fighting. And nobody won. And then from that point on, they got along. I mean, Bill Watts took them in the back and said, hey, throw it down here and let it go, or you both fired. So they fired back and forth and got it out of their system, and then they went about their business.
Yeah, I've heard the worst thing is to actually break up a fight, because then there's still tension going on. You might as well just let them fight, and then it's over.
Well, you could get hurt trying to help them. See what I mean?
Yeah.
Another tough son of a gun in the resume is Dick Slater.
Yes.
Dick Slater. Here's a story I heard from somebody who told me this. I can't remember who told me, but they were in Florida, and it was Bob Orton Sr. was there and Bob Orton Jr. And Dick Slater had went to the ring that night, and he worked with Bob Orton Jr., which they were both great in-ring technicians. I mean, they were great, but they had a somewhat of a difference in the match, and Slater didn't like it. And he came back in the room and he sat down, and then I don't know who came in first. Either Slater came in first or one of them, or Junior did. But they had words, and they got in a fight, and Slater, from what I hear, he beat the shit out of Orton Jr. in front of his father, and ended up sticking his head down in a toilet or something, I heard. And then he sat back down and he looked at the daddy and said, you want some too? He said, no, I'm done. I mean, the senior said, I don't have nothing to do with it. And then from then on out, I guess they were okay. So, and I never heard any repercussions from it, but that's the way wrestlers are. Sometimes it breaks and sometimes it doesn't.
Exactly. Well, I know we're going to wrap up the interview, so I've got to ask one more thing before we go away and probably do a part 2 at some point, because you've seen how many questions are wrote and you've probably seen how many have not answered. So we'll definitely have to do part 3, 4, 5, and 7. I've got to ask, and everyone wanted me to ask you. You once said that your career was going fine, and then Jim Cornette started to manage you.
Yeah.
You've got to give us some Jim Cornette stories, maybe from TNA, from Memphis.
I told Jim that. I said, Jim, I had a good career, then I met you. Of course, he laughed. Well, the story about Cornette that everybody tells is his hatred for Vince Russo. Mm-hmm. And I was in TNA, and I think Russo wasn't there, or he had gone home. I think this was after, I don't know, but he wasn't there. We were doing okay. We were doing great, really. And then Jarrett, and him and his daddy and Dixie Carter, they all owned shares in TNA. And Jeff got it in his head. He wanted to bring in Cornette, which I thought was a great idea. Jeff's very good. I mean, Jimmy is pretty good at figuring out stuff backstage, knows how to get heat. Because he's a student of the business. So is Jeff, so am I. I think to be in this business, you have to be somewhat of a student of it till I quit studying it. So he came in, and he was there about 2 months. And then Vince, and I like Vince because he's a hard worker. He just has there's some people who don't have any ideas. Vince has too many. He does. He has 1,000 ideas. And I think Vince's problem is he doesn't know how to regulate them. And if he has an idea, he'll throw it on top of another idea in the same match, which is, I mean, you're beating a dead horse there. So you can't take this match and make it a lumberjack match, then put barbed wire around it, and then throw something else on top, exploding bombs. He would throw it all together. So anyway, Jimmy came in, and then I heard that Vince Russo was coming in. So Jeff asked me, he says, God, we got to tell Jimmy. I said, you want me to tell him? He says, do you mind? I said, well, yeah, Buck, yeah, I mind. But I'll tell him. So I said, Jimmy, come here a minute. Let me talk to you. He sat down. He said, yeah, what is it? And when somebody calls you over and said, hey, can we talk? And they sit down, it's like it's pretty serious. I says, I just got to tell you something. I want you to know so you won't get caught, blindsided by this. But Vince Russo is coming back in. And he went, I quit. He quit on the spot. I says, Jimmy, don't quit. Please don't quit. It'll work. It'll work. I was trying to, and I don't know if it'll work or not. That's just what I was saying. I was just trying to calm him down. And then I went and told Jeff. I says, well, he quit. No, he didn't. I said, well, I guess I'm a liar. Yeah, he quit. He's going to leave. He's leaving tomorrow morning. He's going to finish today, and he's going to quit. So Jeff went over there, and I don't know what they talked about, but Jimmy ended up staying. But it was, and I actually kept them like apart for a while because I didn't want them to overlap. And it worked for a while, and then it worked till it didn't. Let me say that.
Yeah. How long was it before they even would go in the same room or even talk to each other?
Well, they had to go in the same room in the morning. It was the production room. So that's where we would go in there and we would talk about, the show and who had interviews and who was going to handle what. So we had to all get together in the morning about 10 o'clock. But they never really crossed each other's path for the rest of the day. That's the way Jimmy said he wanted it. That's the way I think Vince preferred it. He didn't say he wanted it that way, but I think he preferred it. And there's a lot of long-standing animosity between Jimmy and Vince. So, and I don't think it'll ever leave Jimmy because Jimmy still hates him. And Vince, I think, he just went on. So, but to me, I told Jimmy, it's not healthy to really have that much dislike for another guy that, sometimes you have to work with. I said, because, I don't know, I think the tension, and Jimmy has high blood pressure anyway. And when he goes off, brother, it's like a volcano erupting. Now, he's never gone off on me, but I've seen him go off on other people. I just sit back in the corner and go, oh, God, here we go again. And I love Jimmy to death. But I understand how he is, and I understand what drives him. So, see, I was the first guy that Jimmy ever managed in Memphis. Here's a trivia question. Who was the first person he ever managed?
Oh, it's not the Galaxians or something. No, was it a woman?
Pretty good.
Damn. I don't think it was like Lil Annie Kai or something, but I can't remember.
Sherry Martell.
Sherry Martell.
That was the first one he ever managed. But nobody much knows that trivia question. But and
I should
he
get half a point at least for that.
Yeah, you do to get a point. That's very good.
I'll tell you what, Dutch, I'm going to thank you so much for your time, and I promise you we'll do a second one if you are willing to put up with me for another hour or so. And just before I let you go as well, what happened to the podcast? It sort of just ended at the beginning or the end of last year.
I got tired of talking to myself, really. And it had a lot of problems. I won't get into my website issues. Oh my God. I don't think the moon landing was as hard as my website to get it up and running. Oh my God. It was but I do a thing on Facebook now called Storytime. Anybody can follow it. Just go to Storytime at Facebook.com, and it's just Dutch Mantel. And you can just go over there and read all my stuff. This week, I told a story about Sputnik Monroe, which is actually wrestling history, because Sputnik is like a legend in Memphis to wrestling fans. And you remember Sputnik?
I know of him. He was credited with integrating the races at Memphis arenas.
Desegregating Memphis Ellis Auditorium because, and that was what my story on Facebook is about, is that black people back in those days, this is back in the 60s, they were required to watch wrestling. They had to go upstairs. They couldn't come on the main floor. And the funny thing about Sputnik was he was a baby face to the black people. They loved him because they disliked him. White people hated him. The black people, they loved him. And
he hung out with them, didn't he? Was it Beale Street he used to go to and hang out
Beale
with?
Street, and that was a story I put up because he was arrested at some bar, and it said, this is the 1960s Memphis newspaper, owned and operated by Negroes, it says. And he got a well-known civil rights lawyer advocate to defend him. And he finally told the promoter of Memphis, if my people, not my black people, but if my people are not welcome on the bottom floor in Ellis, he says, I'll never wrestle here again. And the Memphis black people, they loved that because now they got somebody that was advocating for them. And he's a legend in Memphis. He really is. Sputnik Monroe is. I only met him a couple of times because he was before my time, but I've heard a lot of stories about that guy, and they're all hilarious. So
it's funny how desegregation in Memphis and probably quite a lot of other places was ultimately brought about because money was threatened to be taken away.
Well, sometimes you have to do that, I guess. But, Memphis is the scene of the Martin Luther King assassination. And it had a home of Elvis. Memphis is a very famous town, just as the town. But I think actually Jerry Lawler is more well known as a Memphian than Elvis is now. He's probably the most famous Memphian in the world. I think he outglows them all, even Elvis. Because if you mention Memphis to a wrestling fan, the first thing you're going to think of Lawler. I would say. So, but hey, if you want to do a second one, if the people want it, we'll do it.
Yeah,
so
I'm sure they will.
Talking.
I was going to say Sybil Shepherd may be the second most famous Memphis native. But before we get into Sybil Shepherd, you've got to give us your plugs. You've got a couple of books out, I believe.
I do have a couple of books. It's called The World According to Dutch. And I'm writing another one, but these were 10 years ago. I wrote 2 books back to back and within an 11-month period. And the stories that I just told here today, they're like incorporated into the book. And it isn't written in linear style. It doesn't start here and I went to here and I went to here. It's just stories from all over. It's almost like riding down the road in a car and you're just quoting stories that you just happen to remember at the time. And I'm talking about Memphis, and I'm talking about Puerto Rico, and I'm talking when I first started, and some fights I got in, and this and that and the other, and but it all revolves around wrestling. It's first one is The World According to Dutch, which is my thoughts, and the second one was Tales from a Dirt Road, and I covered the Bruiser Brody murder. I covered that, and that was a wild time. That's almost a whole podcast in itself, really. Mm-hmm. But everybody who's gotten the book, they've all enjoyed it. I had out of 100 reviews, let's say, I've got 99 like they enjoyed the book. Of course, you get the one troll or one asshole. Oh hell, I could have wrote that shit. I could blah blah blah. Jim Cornette said I wrote it. I read it, not wrote it. He said I read it, and he says when I'm reading it and hearing your voice. Because he says you write almost just like you talk. And even Stone Cold Steve Austin told me, he said, Dutch, goddamn you. He says, I started reading the book and I couldn't put it down. He said it was, he said, I read it like in about 2 or 3 hours, but he said, I couldn't put the damn book down. He said, every chapter is different. And then I got a story about Steve. And I told the story when I first met him, when I gave him the name Austin, and he tells the same story I do. So that's how you know stories are fairly accurate, because everybody's going to tell the story a little differently. But if the main details kind of stay the same, the story is accurate. So, and you can find these books on Amazon, or some people, if you want an autographed copy, if you can send me an email at Dirty Dutch Mantell with 2 L's at gmail.com, Dirty Dutch Mantell at gmail.com, and tell me what you want. I'll get back to you and I'll send you an autographed copy. And I usually pick up the postage. But if it's international, like London, you got to pay for it, folks. Because sending it in the States is one thing. Seeing it overseas, I don't know. Hey, one guy, he ordered the books from me. The postage was more than the books.
Yeah.
I said,
It really
my
is.
God, it is. I said, I don't understand that. So, and as far as the podcast is a strange world. I mean, I don't even know. I never even knew how many people I was hitting. I don't know how many downloads. I was just in the dark about it. I should actually find out more about this stuff. But
it's not coming back. The podcast
then
is
one
coming
guy,
back.
it's called, it could. This is what I think sets apart pro wrestling and pro basketball and pro baseball from wrestling. And I want you to think about it, because they all have seasons. Wrestling doesn't have a season. What if you watch football, say it's soccer, but the season never ends? You're just going all through the year. You don't have a champion. You don't have a cutoff spot, or you don't have a trading period and all this. If it just goes on constantly, what's the purpose? They go to pay-per-views, but they don't really have a stopping point. Wrestling doesn't. It's just perpetual. So I think if that's the way it works, wrestling is where it's going to stay, and it's not going to get any better.
I know Calgary had an off period at one point. I know AWA at some point did as well, just because I think maybe the summers were too hot and nobody turned up. But for now, I'm going to thank you so much, Dutch, for joining me, and I'm going to thank you for joining me as well, and we will catch you next week.
Thank you, sir.